So I'm Donna Trujillo. I'm a vice president with Generation Schools Network. I have been and I've been a director of special education for one of the largest districts here in Colorado. Prior to coming on with GSN, my career in education started as a special education teacher, but I have taught all grade levels, general education and special education, as well as being a school administrator. And I'll turn it over to my partner, Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Fuller. And like Donna, I have had that great experience of teaching special education, teaching all grade levels, kindergarten through sixth grade, an elementary principal for 9 years, and now currently a senior director for Generation Schools Network, doing quite a bit of coaching and support with counselors, with teachers and administrators. So really excited you're here. Gosh, it's really interesting for me to read all the different jobs that we have going on here. We've got counselors and teachers, administrators. I think I just saw a yoga instructor. This is really exciting. First grade teacher, great. So thank you guys for coming and joining us.
Yep, and since all of you shared where you are, we'll share where we are. I am currently in Colorado, in a little suburb in Denver. And Kate, where are you?
Well, I am on the road working in the Sholo, Arizona area. And so I just saw someone say Flagstaff. Well, that's a little bit of ways, but I'm in the White Mountains of Arizona today.
All right, moving on. Oh, Ellen, you can go ahead and switch. All right, so here's our agenda. We're going to be talking about what is trauma, what does it do to our brains, what are ACEs, how does trauma present in the classroom, then talking about trauma informed starts with you, and you being here today shows that you are wanting to learn more and hopefully become more informed on this topic. We'll be relating back to childhood trauma and relationships, building a trauma informed classroom, and the activation plan and validation 101. So you guys are not only going to be getting learning, but you're going to be having tools and strategies that you can take back to your schools, districts, your role as a yoga instructor, whatever you do, this will help you. Okay, Ellen. So first of all, what is trauma? In the chat box, can you share what you think the definition of trauma is? And there's no right or wrong answer. Just give us your best idea and your best shot. And for those of you who asked if we will be sharing the slides, yes, Ellen is taking roll and will be sharing out the presentation with our participants today. So let's see what we have going in the chat for this question. What is trauma?
Dramatic event, experiences, unprocessed pain,
Residual effects.
Oh, yes.
Adverse experience, distressing, disturbing. Keep going, Kate.
Anxiety causes anxiety, coping mechanisms, causing physical and mental response, leaves emotional scars. Can be a life-altering experience, yes. Oh.
Reaction to a terrible event.
Yep, can have flashbacks, constrained relationships.
An adverse event that prevents healthy processing.
Yes.
Emotional response, psychological and emotional change.
Yeah.
Let's see what we have. Ellen, what is our definition of trauma? So you all can see that you hit on components of the definition we have presented here. And many of you said you tied it back to the experience, which trauma is the experience of that event. And it depends on each person's response, but it is our protection method. Our response is our protection to that experience of trauma.
And the experience is interesting that if I was in a car accident with Donna and we experienced that event together, how I internalized that trauma could be completely different than how Donna experienced that, and how the adverse effects of it could be completely different.
Yes, and how we respond internally and externally varies from person to person.
Yeah.
Okay, Ellen. So in the chat box, we now want you to share what you think, how trauma and crisis differ. What is the difference between a trauma? What is the difference between a traumatic event versus being in crisis, or an event that is a crisis? What do you think that difference is?
Trauma can be ongoing. A crisis might be more acute. It could be immediate. Trauma is long-term, or maybe long-term, lasting effects of trauma. Crisis can be happening just in the moment. Crisis can be short-term. Trauma can be lasting. Yeah, crisis is more immediate. Both can be traumatizing. Trauma is personal and crisis is environmental.
Trauma has long-term effects.
Mm-hmm.
The length vary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Crisis, okay, trauma has long-term effects. Crisis doesn't mean it's not something you handle in the present.
Mm-hmm.
A crisis may or may not be a one-time event. Trauma often leaves much more lasting effects. Yeah. And then trauma affects the brain in psychological or in physiological ways. Yes. So yes, we wanted to capture this and have the talk about this, because a lot of times I hear staff saying, using these interchangeably, and they're very two different things. A crisis is something that, yes, is happening, you get through it, it's over and done, you made it through. Trauma has sustainable, lasting effects on a person's mindset, on their emotional and physical reaction to events that come up in the future and can lead to triggers. Typically with a crisis, we work through it. Phew, I'm glad I got through that. Glad that one's over, and just move on. Mm-hmm. Whereas trauma, that is not the case. Ellen? Next one. Oh, Ellen, we're ready for the next slide, sorry. Okay,
all right.
Go ahead, Kate.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain and what happens, just parts of the brain, so we can build upon that, so all of us have that shared understanding of the brain. So 3 simple parts of the brain, beginning with the brain stem, which is, the back of your brain, down your neck. We call that the reptilian brain, or the lizard brain. It's instinctual. So we do that flight, fright, freeze mode. It's not a thinking part of the brain. The limbic system, or the limbic part of the brain, is that emotional part of the brain. And then neocortex, the rational thinking brain, we can refer to that as the wizard brain, where you're doing your thinking and learning. Next slide, Ellen. And so now that we have a little bit of understanding about the brain, we're going to talk about then experiences that the brain has to handle. And this is the ACEs. So yes, you get another acronym, Adverse Childhood Experiences. If we can click, Ellen, on the 3 buckets here. First is the bucket of abuse, environmental challenges, and neglect. So if you could just throw into the chat some experiences that you think may be fitting into any of these buckets. Some adverse childhood experiences or traumatic experiences. Domestic abuse, yes. Food insecurity, absolutely. Divorce. Unemployed parent, sexual abuse, physical abuse, alcohol.
Addictions, housing, obesity.
Environmental challenges, living in the neighborhood, crime, yes. Homelessness, neglect, change in household or health, parent separation, hunger, poverty.
Prison, gangs, yeah. Hoarding.
Violence, yes, yes. All right, so as we click through this, Ellen's going to show us some of the different experiences that can go under abuse. emotional, physical, sexual abuse. Under environmental challenges, parents, perhaps a parent was treated violently, some substance abuses, mental health, mental illness, parent separation, incarceration. I don't know that we had that
Yeah,
in
we did.
our
We had
chapter.
prison.
Enough.
Mhm.
Okay. How about neglect? And neglect, it could be physical or emotional neglect. So something I want to caution you is that you may have experienced some of these as a child or even as an adult, and you may feel some anxiety right now being re-triggered with some of these. I know that when I read this slide, I have sweaty palms right now because I was a foster parent and I adopted 2 of my foster kids. And when I look at this slide, my boys, I can check off every single experience and know that that's what they experienced. And yet I also know that they've gone through it with a lot of support and counseling, and they're healthy young adults. So I just want to encourage you that way too, if you're experiencing any anxiety right now. So let's continue, Ellen. When we look at abuse, what the outcome of that is that there's a lack of safety. If you or students have experienced those environmental challenges, then they feel powerless. And if they were in a neglectful situation, then they feel disregard, that the self-worth is not there. So those are the results of any ACEs experiences. Going on to the next slide.
The ACEs are common. You can see that about 61% of adults surveyed report that they had at least one type of ACE or an experience related to ACE, and nearly 1 in 6 reported they had experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. So 4 or more, that's a lot, and it just keeps compiling. And if it's not taken care of and people aren't able to recognize and support, then mental illness can come into play, and many physical and psychological effects can start to begin. And preventing ACEs could potentially reduce a large number of health conditions. So you can see right there that heart disease could be reduced if we took care of children and help them be in environments where they were not having these adverse childhood experiences. And also remember, some children are at greater risk than others, typically women and several racial ethnic minority groups, and they are at greater risk for having experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. And then tying it back to money, it's costly. The economic and social cost of families, communities, and society totals hundreds of billions of dollars each year. Even Kate, your example of the students or your children coming from foster homes, the amount of money spent to get those children into a safe home and a safe environment and nurture them, and the years of therapy I'm sure that they had to endure, and paying for all of that, it's a $1 billion industry because of that. So
Yeah.
what can we do about this? Go ahead, Ellen. So we do have the ACEs survey. When you get the presentation, you are free to take this. It gives you your own ACE score where you get to dig in and see, maybe I have had these traumatic events, these adverse childhood experiences, to kind of be aware. It creates that self-awareness. And like Kate said a moment ago, she was triggered. If you feel like this is something that could trigger you, or seeing this, recalling things could trigger you, you may want to consider waiting until you're in a safe place to take the survey. But if you know, it is insightful, and it's great to know where your responses to situations may be stemming from.
Yeah. And we're asking, seeing if we can put it in the chat. So Ellen, perhaps you can put that quiz or link in the chat, but remember, you will all get the PowerPoint sent to you as well.
Okay, next slide, Ellen. So how does trauma present in class? Those of you who are educators have likely had experience with this. So in the chat box, or even it can even be in home if you're not an educator, how does trauma present? If you could add your ideas to the chat box now.
refusing to work, behavior, inattention, inability to focus, lack of trust, panic attacks, constant state of flight, fright, unable to focus, self-harm,
Self-harm.
sleeping, shutting down, fighting, depression, trust issues, aggression, yes, hypervigilance,
Hypervigilance. Yeah.
lashing out, hyperactivity, hypervigilant, emotional outbursts, yes.
Sleeping.
Flipping lids.
Self-isolating.
We're going to talk about flipping lids. Yes. Self-isolating. Yes.
Controlling others, controlling your others' behavior or their own. Lack of control on their part, or over control of others,
Yes.
or losing out when they lose control. Bullying.
Absolutely. Maybe being guarded or distrusting adults. Yes. You guys got it.
Yep. Ellen, if you could click through what we have. Thank you, Ellen. You put the survey link in there. So if you guys want to click on that after the training, you are free to do so. So yes, you got so much of this. Trouble forming relationships with teachers, poor self-regulation, negative thinking, fear of failure, risk avoidance, difficulty taking other viewpoints, executive function challenges, hypervigilance. These are all signs of trauma. It doesn't mean just because but I also want to make sure that you guys know, just because a student is showing this doesn't specifically mean they have had trauma or it's tied to a traumatic event. So as a team, we have to dig into that more. We need to learn more about that student, develop that relationship, talk to families, talk to their previous teachers, current teachers, because sometimes some of this also can be a disability. So we don't want to give you anything to think, oh, wow, the student has executive function challenges, they must have had trauma. These are just signs that you would want to dig further and determine, has there been a traumatic event, or is there something else going on medically or due to a disability causing these as well? Because students with disabilities can really present as trauma, and some of them are comorbid, where they have experienced trauma and also have a disability. Yep, and hypervigilance and arousal. So talking about this, our physical indications of fight or flight response, we like to think of ourselves often as, okay, we're not animals. Well, we are animals. We are mammals, and we have that flight or fight just like animals do. And so when we're in a difficult situation, our brain reacts. And some signs of hypervigilance and arousal that you can see in people are pale or flushed skin, those dilated pupils, they could be trembling, their rapid heartbeat and breathing. All of those are signs. I know for me, when I'm struggling and I'm stressed, my face might turn red. So Kate, what do you have when you're stressed?
Yeah, I definitely do the trembling. Sometimes it's my hands and sometimes it's even my voice will tremble.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we're being aware of this and then taking action to support. Okay, Ellen?
And just thinking in terms of the effects of trauma, what we get to see is just that tip of the iceberg, but the effects are deep, what we don't see. So thinking in terms of my own children through the foster care system, we could see some of the behaviors and knew that they had some trauma. And as little 2-year-old, 4-year-olds, they would do their counseling, but that effects of the trauma was so deep that, as then a young adult, it was the revolving door counseling all through their childhood, because different parts of the trauma would then exhibit itself, would then come to the surface. And then we're like, okay, now we need to go and process and work through this emotion or this traumatic event that's now surfaced to the top. So unfortunately, the effects of trauma, often we just see a little bit of it.
Yep. And also I want to state, Joe talked about relationship is key with students, and teachers can be personal triggers. We do have to remember that too. So don't, as adults, teaching students, working with students, or even parents working with students, we have to monitor how we react when a student is dysregulated or aroused. We have to make sure that they are supported and we're not taking their trauma personally or their response to trauma triggers personally, that we're working and coaching and remaining calm and coming alongside them and supporting them versus getting down on them or trying to push them harder through it.
Right. That co-regulation is really important. Yes. For us to be self-aware and then self-manage our own so that we can then be of assistance.
Yep. And Laura, we need to learn to respond rather than react. Well
Yep.
said.
Yeah. And next slide, Ellen.
So think back. I want you to think back if you've been a teacher and if you're a parent or if you've interacted with someone, think back on a really difficult student with whom you struggled. And as you're picturing that student and thinking about them, what were the specific behaviors that were so challenging that you couldn't get through? And were like one of those things where, oh my gosh, I hope the student doesn't come today because I'm not going to have to deal with this behavior. And then what are the different ways that you could interpret those behaviors? So some examples were trouble forming relationships with teachers, poor self-regulation, negative thinking, the fear of failure, risk avoidance, difficulty taking other viewpoints, executive functioning challenges, and hypervigilance, going back to that list. And in the chat box, add what specific behaviors you've had to deal with based upon that student with whom you struggled.
Urinate in the playground, defiance, impulsivity.
Odd storytelling.
Interesting. Interrupting, yes, constant interrupting, outbursts, at the event with the class, from cutting, negativity, swearing, disrupting teachers and peers, oversharing, very needy, eloping, interesting.
Extreme self-loathing and intense anger. Yeah, the eloping for escaping. Headbanging, I've seen that too.
Destroying materials, rage, aggression, attention seeking, absolutely.
Changing stories.
Yeah.
Don't care attitude. Maybe they don't have that empathy. We're afraid to get close. Could be lots of reasons for that.
Outbursts, self-harm. Yeah.
That's a lot, guys. That's a lot to deal with. Extreme lack of self-control, aggression, avoidance, physical violence, work avoidance, apathy. Yep. Thank you. Suicidal ideations. Okay, Ellen. So go ahead, Kate.
So we're going to look at a video. It's about 4.5 minutes long. And before we started, I want to share a few things about it so that you can get the most out of it. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about terminology. In this video, Jacob refers to the learning brain versus the survival brain. Remember earlier, I talked about, next slide, Ellen, I talked about the learning brain is our wizard brain, our thinking brain, our learning brain, and the lizard brain is that survival brain. So just lizard brain, wizard brain versus the survival brain. All right, just a terminology piece. And then also looking at the big ideas that are in this. So be looking for those moment-to-moment interactions, which are the heart of the trauma-informed teaching. Look at the hospitality mindset, understanding your own survival brain, and then learn to manage yourself. As Donna said, when you're needing to help an activated, traumatic impacted student, when they're in that red zone, you have to be able to manage yourself so you don't get sucked in and react to them. So that's all part of this video. We're going to go to the next slide and start sharing that video for you.
Everyone. Today, I thought we would talk about the big question, what it really takes to become a trauma-informed organization. And I think my answer is actually quite different from what other people say, because I think other people focus on what actions should be taken, what needs assessments need to be done or what services need to be put in place. And for me, I think that the most important thing is the moment when a person is about to become trauma reactive and how well everyone else can handle that situation without becoming trauma reactive themselves. Because what I've learned from doing interviews of offenders or students or anyone who uses these trauma-informed organizations is that the most important thing that makes or breaks a person's day is actually the moment-to-moment interactions with people. And people as random as like the lunch lady in the cafeteria who will give you a full serving of food or not just based on whether or not they like you and how they feel that day. Or whether or not a safety officer will use excessive discipline just because they're frustrated with you. Those little moment-to-moment things are really what make people feel safe in an environment. And what I don't get is that the hospitality industry completely understands this. Every five-star hotel or five-star restaurant knows that service is the foundation upon which the whole experience rests. And so I really think that trauma-informed organizations need to take a hospitality mindset. And what hospitality means in a trauma-informed organization, I think, is that you're always being sensitive and attentive to the other person's needs and sensitive to their trauma reactiveness and the fact that you yourself can be trauma reactive and that you have to always guard against going into survival brain yourself, and to amp up as much as you can your ability to stay clear, to stay purpose-driven and goal-directed and emotionally attuned to the other people. Okay, so then the first step in learning how to do that is actually to understand what your own survival brain looks like. Now for me, I know that when I get into survival brain, if I'm going into the aggressive mode, then I think people are stupid, that they have bad intentions, that they don't mean well, that they're only doing things to hurt other people. And then whenever I go into the withdrawal phase, I just want to give up on a project, give up on the people, think that they're never going to change. So when I realize that I'm in that alarm state, the first thing I do is just to slow things down as much as possible. Because I know that my body's been activated and I have adrenaline rushing through me and I'm feeling intense feelings, and there's no way that I can just snap out of it. I have to let my emotions and my body cool down on its own. So I have to have a lot of patience for myself. I also try to scan my body and get grounded in it again. And I try to take some deep belly breaths and take control of my breathing again. And the other really important thing to do is that I try not to get mad at myself for getting into that alarm state. Because I know that my alarm has only been activated because something really important to me is going on. Or because I feel like something that I really care about is being threatened. And then once I do that, I try to figure out what page I'm on. And PAGE is an acronym that I just made up that I think captures the essence of how to de-escalate from an alarm state. And the first step of PAGE is to really remember what my purpose is. And by purpose, I mean my purpose in life, in the kind of life I want to live, and in the values that I uphold. And then I try to remember how this moment can be a moment when I'm trying to live my purpose in life. And then the next thing I do is try to figure out whether I'm being emotionally attuned to the other person. Because as alarms go up, then self-absorption kicks up, and I'm only worried about how this person's trying to attack me and whether I'm getting my needs and opinions across. And so this really helps me to slow down and pay attention to what's going on in the other person. And the next thing I do is to ask, what is the goal or intention of our meeting, this interaction, or even this very moment or this conversational turn? And when you're in an alarm state, you forget what the goal is and all you care about is self-protection. But if you remember what your goal is, then that can help you to stay focused on what you really want to accomplish and what you want to say and do. And then finally, I ask myself, what am I really feeling? And oftentimes, the only things I can understand are the anger and frustration. So I have to dig a little deeper and ask, what is the hurt or the vulnerability that I'm feeling that I really don't want to express to the other person because I'm feeling threatened? And then I try to reorient my stance to express that hurt and vulnerability and feel confident that that's the only way that I'm ever going to get anything accomplished. And what I really want to say is that being in this clear, calm, purpose-driven state of mind is incredibly difficult, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice. I think of it like being in great cardiovascular shape if you're an athlete, because you can learn a lot of techniques for being trauma-informed, and that's like learning the actual skills of your game. But to actually be able to execute all those techniques, you have to be in great physical shape. And to do that, you have to run miles and miles every day And you have to keep training, and you can never let that cardiovascular endurance slide, or else your game just suffers. So this is really the most foundational, most important thing that people need to learn to become a trauma-informed person, and then to help your organization become trauma-informed as well. Now, after you've done this for 100 hours of practice, then you can move on to some of the techniques that we'll go over in the next videos. Thank you.
Yep.
And Ellen, on the next slide.
Good. That's a win.
Not what we want.
Good morning, Dr. Jacob Ham.
Oh,
Good morning, Rabbi.
this is not what
Nice
we
to see
want.
You're
we
on
have
the
to
farm.
escape out, Ellen, and then get back.
Oh, it's a
That's on the
place in
chat.
upstate New York, this corporate retreat center that the psychiatry department took us to one year.
Sorry, folks.
I just took that picture. I thought it was lovely.
This
And who doesn't want to
Get
be?
escape. Oh, that's okay.
Few technical difficulties there. Sure, Ellen's going to get us back queued up. So one of the things that really stuck with me with that video was it's the lens of us as adults, what we need to do when a student is in a sense of trauma, or we're in the sense of trauma, as he was explaining, but really being purposeful, staying attuned to what the other person needs, looking at what our goal is, keeping that goal, what do I want to achieve in this moment or this conversation, and then really checking in with our own emotions. And Donna?
Okay. So the most important move in the chat box, I would like you to answer any one of these questions or all of them. So what did you think and feel as you heard Jacob's idea about what's most important to be a trauma-informed organization? What do you already do with a hospitality mindset? What do you already know about your survival brain? And which part of page is most difficult for you during the school day? You can pick any one of those to answer in the chat or answer them all. Kate, for you, what struck you?
I think what really struck me was that sense of staying attuned to that other person, getting myself out of that flight fright mode. When he talked about grounding yourself and being able to breathe through that and then focus on the other person.
Great.
How about you, Donna?
For me, it was just when he said, when you feel like you're being attacked or something that really is important to you is attacked, that's when you get triggered and something you believe in. And I see that with myself when I am triggered.
Yeah.
If it's really important to me, or if I feel like I'm doing well and I failed, then I become triggered. And some of the others, pandemic really showed the survival brain. I've had to allow myself to just survive sometimes. Yep.
We're seeing quite a few people like that hospitality mindset, that we're there to serve, putting on the Ritz.
Yep. And I thought about that too for myself, the hospitality mindset. When I'm working at our restaurant, that's all we think about. We are serving. What can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? And when I'm in education, when I'm working with students and teachers and administrators, when they're triggered, it's that hospitality. What can I do to help you? Or even just giving them the space to eat their food or work through what they need to, right? Not constantly being there on top of them. Can I get you anything?
Right.
It's that reaction, and different people think of it differently.
And one of the things that popped up in the chat was that the balance of compassion versus holding students accountable. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few more slides. That it's a balancing act sometimes. Yeah.
Yep. And then I see that we gave a lot of people to think of, some ideas to think about too with this video. And that's good. It's a great conversation starter and exactly where we need to start so that that's the first step to making things happen.
And recognizing, as he mentioned, the first thing that you recognize is like maybe you're angry, that surface emotion, but perhaps that's not the root emotion that's really happening. So that's something that was really good learning for me.
You know what? And Amy just said something. As a middle school counselor, it's exhausting to be constantly hospitable with
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
That is, I get it. I'm sure we all can kind of have moments where we feel like we're drained. Do I have to listen to another person's problems? Do I have to deal with another situation? Remember your self-care.
Yeah.
Remember to do things for yourself, whether it's sitting in a quiet room for 15 minutes with no one around you and telling the kids to stay out, or if it's going for a run, writing in a journal, taking breaths, visualizing where you want to be next, taking yourself out of that situation for a moment. It's okay to say, I need a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. As we talked about, if you are in the survival state too, you're not going to be of help to that student. So you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you're helping others.
Yep. And you're right. Remember, it's not selfish to take care of yourself. You're actually helping others by taking care of yourself.
And modeling how to do it, doing that think aloud where you're talking and saying, I'm really frustrated right now and I need to take a minute, and you're saying that out loud to the students. So you're modeling how they can take care of themselves. Yep, that compassion fatigue is a real thing. Absolutely. Yeah.
So some homework. We want you to think about your lizard brain. Observe your lizard brain. What makes you go there? What did it do to you? And or try out Paige and see what works and what doesn't in tough moments. And if you practice these, if you dig into these, it will help you understand yourself, your reaction. Also, if you're triggered dealing with someone else's reaction, it can decrease that compassion fatigue or just those feelings in yourself.
Yes, Deb, we will share the recorded session with you. So yes, you can absolutely use it. Mm-hmm.
So triggers in the chat box, what are some triggers and how can they be avoided? Amy, I love that you take your time for yourself. Yep. Sometimes that beauty of the outdoors, getting the vitamin D.
Getting grounded.
Yep.
Literally.
So triggers, yelling, absolutely.
Wow. Being a criminal major in going into prisons and working with those folks. Wow.
Yep.
Disrespect, that can be a trigger. Yelling, tone of voice.
Tone of voice, that's good because you can see a lot. A lot of our communication comes from our physical communication versus our words, but that tone and pitch really play into that too.
Along with those facial expressions, the nonverbal communication.
Yeah, and that students not respecting each other, our kids at home not respecting each other. I can tell when my kids are triggered because they start fighting when normally they get along well. What's going on? Let's take a moment.
We're talking about some sensory overload, weather, light in the classroom. So all those environmental issues can cause problems for ourselves and for children.
Looking like their parents when they're in school. What about looking like